Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Educating the Black Child. We know that folks are still filtering in, but we want to get started with our conversation as soon as possible, honor everybody's time. So we're very excited to have you all here for this interdisciplinary conversation about educating Black children. I'm the host. My name is Hadari Davis. I'm joined behind the scenes by my wife, Candace Wicks Davis, and our partner, our operations director, Shayna Silva. They might peek in every now and then. You might see my children peek in every now and then because we don't have childcare today. Kind of common realities for parents, working parents who are working from home. So welcome to our home. This event is brought to you by Edutainment for Equity, which is a consulting and production company that specializes in creating transformative experiences in pursuit of a more equitable world. And for more information about us, please visit edutainmentforequity.com. Contact us, let us know how we can support you in your work as agents of change. We always begin this event with a land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging the First Nation territory from which we are broadcasting. We are in the land of the Ohlone people in the nation of Ladson, commonly known as Oakland, California. We want to honor these ancestors whose legacy we take advantage of every day. Those who are buried in the mounds and hills around our home, in recognition of their victimization to the settler colonial project and their proximity to the ancestors of all people who are still here, we present this acknowledgement of our respect and our appreciation and our bearing witness to their lives. We know that they're still here, both in spirit and in the flesh, and we honor their presence in these lands. And I want to encourage all of you to name the lands and the peoples whose lands you are in, find yourself sitting in, the lands of those ancestors who lived before colonization. We like to welcome these spirits into the space and just remind us that we're part of a continuum of resistance, of struggle, and of response to these projects that are continuing to impact our lives and the lives of our children. And so we always encourage everyone who is participating to remember where you are, whose ancestors carved that land, created those irrigation systems, extended those territories, made those places livable. And we like to say that if you don't know who those people are, there's a reason for that too. That's part of the education system. And we'd like to encourage you to find out if you don't know and share that with others, especially with the young people that you engage in your work. So thank you for doing that. In addition to that, we always start this event with an acknowledgement of our ancestors, the ancestors of Black children, especially those who committed their lives to the upliftment of Black people, educators, teachers, scholars, activists, artists, whose work and intention created the space for this conversation to happen over the past 5 years and extending beyond our conversation. In the spirit of libation, we always like to call their names, especially the names of those who have passed. So we like to call out, in addition to John Lewis, Maya Angelou, Tupac Shakur, and Cicely Tyson, we like to always call out Mary McLeod Bethune and Carter G. Woodson, and just recognize the impact of their work on our lives and on our professional lives, on our personal lives, and on the work we do as Edutainment for Equity. We welcome you to type the names of ancestors in the chat who you would like to have present with us in this conversation today. We want to encourage you to invite these Egun in and charge you at the end of this conversation to remember them, thank them, and invite them to leave. We want to open with inviting them in the place, but we also want to release them so that they have an opportunity to share their spirit, their light, their energy beyond our conversation and beyond our gathering. So thank you for the acknowledgements. Thank you for these names, these ancestral names. And I want to end this moment with the word Ashe, a word of peace, and encourage y'all to whisper that in your own breath, the word Ashe. This is our contact information. And these are the hashtags that we'll be using during the conversation. So we want to, it's a little hard. Usually this event in the past was a live event, which it's much easier to take action photos or Instagram photo or whatever. In this case, if there's things that are said in this experience that you want to quote, if there's ideas that empower you during the course of this thing, we'd love for you to post them wherever you do your posting, and to just leave these hashtags so folks know where it came from and that we're connected to this particular event. Our examination of the education of Black children is really an interrogation of the future of Black people. We recognize that the very survival of African people around the world, and especially in the United States, is dependent on the quality of education that Black children receive. And so in light of, and in the spirit of what Alicia B. Wormsley's work does in affirming Black presence in the future, this conversation is about that too. It's about getting the education of children right now so that we can have a better, brighter, and more empowered future. We're so honored to have Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings with us. But before we introduce our renowned guests, we want to orient ourselves to the challenges and triumphs of Black children in these times. It's important to put our conversation in context and to measure the implications and consequences of the time. So this particular image represents the reality our children are facing in schools today. Despite the fact that schools have opened all over the world, the United States has higher COVID-19 cases per capita compared to other countries that reopen schools. So, the United States has not been getting COVID right since the beginning, and we continue as a nation to struggle with the disease. Around the country, the Delta variant has wreaked havoc on Black and brown communities and continues to do so in places without mask mandates and low levels of community vaccination. We're seeing many changes in schools, but we're also seeing a replication of the status quo, gaps in access and opportunities, overcrowded classrooms, undersupported and underpaid teachers, and culturally irresponsible curriculum. Public schools have also been the target of a right-wing campaign that intends to ban any critical analysis of race and racial inequity in the classroom. The GOP has unveiled a full frontal assault on boards of education, linking mask mandates to critical race theory and ginning up vitriol to quote unquote, take back America's schools. And though we've heard a lot about their efforts to ban what they have called critical race theory, not that they're actually banning critical race theory, because you have to know what you're banning in order to ban it, but what they're calling critical race theory. We've often not been reminded of how many states have either reaffirmed critical race theory or taken no action against the theory at all. So there's more states where the theory has not been acted against, but what we hear a lot in the media is about what these 6 states have done in terms of banning critical race theory. So that's just something to think about, that this is an evolving conversation, but oftentimes we hear more about the negative than we do about the positive. What we don't hear about is the continuing miseducation of Black children, that the putting Black children in these classrooms does not guarantee them a pathway to success. This idea of learning loss, that our students have not been in school, so they've lost some learning, but what they also lost was like the subjugation, being subject to these colonial ideas in the education system, being bullied by these systems, by these institutions. Those things were lost too. And so our take on part of the pressure that's being raised for children to get back into schools has to do with getting them back into this sort of institutional framework of mental incarceration. Many parents and children are opting out. So these characteristics have driven many African-American children and families to homeschools. What was once considered a fringe idea has gained more traction since the pandemic, where many parents discovered either the challenges or the triumphs of teaching their own children. And so though white families still outpace Black families in terms of homeschooling, this year there's been a dramatic rise in the numbers of families and children who are making the choice to keep their children at home. So it's important. These images kind of represent what we think this sort of right-wing attack on critical race theory on schools, what that looks like. And obviously the impact that it has on our children who are present is something that if you've been in American schools and you're an African-American or Black person, you have been subject to this sort of erasure, this sort of revision of the experience of Black people in the United States, the colonial experience of indigenous people in the United States. A lot of that resistance, a lot of that, the challenges that existed over the past 500 years have already been erased out of our history books. They've already been removed from the curriculum. And part of our role and the role of like-minded agents of change is to teach the truth, is to reaffirm those truths, and to find those spaces where erasure has happened and to replace that erasure with real, concrete, true history and experience. So we think all this is happening as a response to the census projections. All recent population growth in the United States can be attributed to people of color, according to the Brookings Institute. The census release shows America is more diverse and multiracial than it's ever been in its history. The population has dramatically is dramatically decreasing in terms of the white population in the United States, and the population of people of color is increasing dramatically, up almost 10% just in the past 10 years. And that is sort of a context for what the political volatility, a context for a lot of the conflicts that are happening between the political parties. There's an interest in maintaining a status quo that perpetuates, white supremacy, a white hierarchy, the American hegemony. And then there is sort of this movement of people who are vastly becoming a majority, who are fighting against that, who want a more multiracial, multi-ethnic, diverse educational experience, because that's what that's where we're headed for in the future. So now to the good stuff. To our guest, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings. She's a scholar, educator, author, teacher, researcher. She is a dawn in this conversation. She is someone who has held this conversation for many years. If you haven't heard of her, it's maybe your head was in the sand, or perhaps you're not in the education game hard. So here's an example, just a sample of some of the texts that Dr. Billings has either written, edited, wrote a foreword for. Dr. Billings' work is so extensive that it's hard to find an educator or a scholar or a researcher who's doing this work now, who's not citing Dr. Billings, who's not a student of Dr. Billings, who's not reading Dr. Billings. So that's just an important context to understand. And I'm going to put her bio in the chat so you see how long it is, but I wanted to show this. This is kind of the signature of Dr. Billings' email. And it's just important to note that she has been retired since 2018, and she's still Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin, still president of the National Academy of Education. Now, this is like hashtag retirement goals right here. If you want to be if you're about your mission, if you're about transformation, it's hard to turn that off. Like, you can change jobs, you can shift positions in terms of where you're working, but in the projects that you're working on, but that passion, that drive, it doesn't go away just because you've retired or moved to a different organization. And so here we have this incredible scholar here with us. Dr. Billings, please join us and let everybody, feel the virtual claps, the virtual standing ovation that you're getting. All the feels. We can't see all the hands and faces, but I imagine people are doing this.
Thank you, Hadori.
I want to start by talking about, it's weird to go back to 2006, but I want to start talking about the education debt, because I think it's a great starting point for folks who are being introduced not only to your work, but to this idea of sort of what America owes to Black children, what the country owes to a Black future. You said our focus on the achievement gap is akin to a focus on the budget deficit, but what is actually happening to African American and Latino students is really more like the national debt. We do not have an achievement gap, we have an education debt. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Well, I tried to use an economic analogy for people to understand why I was switching the language. And I'm someone who believes language matters.
Mm.
You know, if you call a grown adult Black man a boy, okay, that matters. If you call a grown adult woman a girl, that matters. So we need to be more precise in our language. And so this notion of the achievement gap, I believe, connotes the idea that, oh, there's a little space between where successful students are and where unsuccessful students are, where white students are and where Black students. No, what we have is a debt, and the debt. The analogy I tried to draw is, if you think about the budget deficit, the Congress goes into the budget planning process knowing that they're going to propose a budget that uh, expends more than they will have revenue for. So there'll be a shortfall. Now, cities and states can't do that. They have to have a balanced budget, but the US government can plan to have a shortfall. And it's not new. We have had a budget deficit since the 1700s. We always have it. Sometimes it shrinks and sometimes it grows. But the debt is the accumulation of all of those deficits over all of those years. So when you add them all together, you get a debt. If you were to look at the US budget, you would see that the number one expenditure is for national security. So we are talking bombs, planes, soldiers, the defense, all of that comes under that rubric. That's the number one expenditure. The number two expenditure is what people sometimes call entitlement. So Social Security, disability, The number three expenditure is debt service. We're paying down the interest on this debt. And I got this idea years ago. I was in New York, headed back to LaGuardia Airport, sitting in a cab. And if you've ever been, on that Tribeca Bridge, just trying to get to where you're going, you're stuck in traffic until folks start to move. And I looked out the window and saw a bulletin board that had these numbers, a huge number that was rapidly changing. And the caption said, "This is the US debt." And it was something at that time like 13 trillion. This, big number. But right under there was a smaller number, but still a big number to me. I think something like 560,000, something like that. And that caption said, "And this is your portion of it." And I was like, wait, what? I'm not gonna be able to pay this off. This is not gonna happen. So I asked myself, why did I feel obligated? Right? Well, I think because you framed it, you told me it was a debt. That something was owed. So that, in combination with reading Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, and then later a book he wrote called Quitting America, made me begin to think about, well, what's the education debt? And I actually sat down with some colleagues here at Wisconsin who are economists. And they said, oh, no, economists always, mathematize a social problem. So we can tell you what the debt looks like. And yes, there is an education debt. It's the money we should have been paying in, but eventually have to pay at the end, whether it is in incarceration, whether it is in things like providing social welfare. I mean, all kinds of things. If we had paid up front,
right,
in things like early childhood,
right,
or ensuring that students actually did graduate from high school, we wouldn't be accumulating this debt. So that's all a part of how I got to this notion because I think people can walk around comfortably with the idea of an achievement gap. But many politicians will say over and over, we can't leave our children this debt. I mean, that became a rallying
Mm-hmm.
cry. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, well, what other debts exist?
Mm.
So that's kind of where education debt came from.
I think that's powerful. It corresponds well with the reparations conversation, and I've even seen people suggest that the form that reparations should take should somehow rest in the space of education, uh,
Mm-hmm.
whether that means investing in higher education, whether that means free preschools for the descendants of slavery, whether that means what does that look like? So maybe that's my question. We have this debt. What does reparation look like? What does paying the debt look like?
So one of the things that when I try to talk about the relationship between the sort of macro structure or the macro culture and those of us who have been minoritized, I want us to be particularly focused on the specificity of our experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I'll say is you cannot sit at a table with indigenous people without the first thing that's on that table is around sovereignty. I don't want to talk about anything else before that. That's a different issue than for me as a Black person, but it is a central issue.
Mm-hmm.
For our Latinx brothers and sisters, I don't think you have the conversation without putting on the table things like linguistic sovereignty and migration.
Mm-hmm.
Those are essential things. So when you talk about Black folks, to me, the conversation must start with reparation. What repair are you willing to do? Are you obligated to do? And so, for my corner of the world, which is education, I want every Black parent to know that when their child enters the world, that they have an education that is paid for from pre-K through college. I don't even want them to think about the
Mm-hmm.
cost of college.
Mm-hmm.
Now, someone said, well, you just can't do that. I actually spent 1 year at the University of Minnesota Morris as a visiting scholar. Didn't even know this place existed. When you say University of Minnesota, I'm going to Twin Cities.
Right.
This thing is out this in the frontier. Okay, you're talking that the closest cities are like Fargo, North Dakota, and
Wow.
Bismarck. I mean, it's just out there.
Wow.
But it was originally an Indian boarding school. It is a relatively small liberal arts college in the University of Minnesota system. So just like University of North Carolina has the Asheville campus as their liberal arts campus,
Mm-hmm.
Morris is the liberal arts campus in the University of Minnesota system. It was originally an Indian boarding school.
Mm.
If you can prove Indian register, you're registered in the Federal Register for Indigenous people, you go to Morris for free.
Right.
Nobody's saying why you can't do it. And I think to underscore for people why it's important, there is one building on that campus which is a former dormitory, because those boarding schools destroyed families. They destroyed tribal and ethnic relations. They we already just saw, I believe, in Canada about a month ago,
Yep.
digging up all these bodies. I mean, the insane, inhumane treatment that happened to these people. So the idea that you would say, well, as a Black person, you should be able to go into any college that you are qualified to go to, that the federal government will pay for that, I don't think that's out of the question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think yesterday I saw the Navy flying a fighter jet that broke in pieces in the sky, just broken pieces. It's like, I don't know, $20 million just just like that, just gone, right? Or you think about the $85 billion dollars of military equipment and training that was left behind in Afghanistan, and it's left like so. That's not that the money is. It's not money is not the issue. It's because there's plenty of that. It's about the will.
And I think one of the things that people don't realize that there are people in our society who are receiving reparation right now. If you are a survivor of the Holocaust, the German Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, the government of Germany sends you a check every month. I saw a woman not too long ago who said her grandmother was a survivor. And she said that the ability of my grandmother to receive that check every month is directly linked to my ability to go to college.
Wow.
Because she actually didn't, it was additional money for her. And so she always saved it.
Right.
And when it was time for me to go to college, she said, here you go.
Okay. I hope y'all getting this heat out here.
On the other hand, Haiti is paying reparations to France.
Right, exactly.
That's not the craziest thing you ever heard of.
On the
people
other hand,
always ask, why can't Haiti seem to do? They have been in such debt because they want, okay? Because the overture said, get out of here. They place those people in an incredible debt to the French, like the French need money from Haiti, right?
It's a true story all across Africa. This is like we're moving into part 2 of our conversation, which we haven't even scheduled yet, because when I talk about the education debt, colonialism, and this actual reparations thing that's happening, and you see countries like Ghana or Senegal or Angola who are paying this like they owe these colonial countries. Meanwhile, in the education system, it's run by churches and church groups, and they're changing people's names. Anyway, that's a different conversation. I don't even want to go. I want to talk about and think about kind of how your career has spanned both the growth of education for Black children. And I don't think people are really conscious of statistics like this. So we always say, ain't nothing changed, everything. So just to say, dropout rates among African-American children, Black children, have decreased dramatically over the past 50 years. Enrollment in college has actually increased. More often, the story that we hear is the rise of the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, school to police pipeline. So your career kind of spans these two forces kind of existing at the same time. And we've seen the integration of schools. We've seen the integration of staff rooms. We haven't really seen the integration of curriculum or of policy. So let's talk about another one of your landmark contributions, right? Which is kind of in the context of this, looking at culturally responsive education, thinking about how important that has been in this process and how important it will continue to be to kind of move away from incarceration and towards education.
So I guess I would say that, the question that always remains in the forefront of Black folks' minds when it comes to education is always education for what? And I'm not sure we always have good answers for it. So, while I'm so happy to see you show these statistics showing that fewer students are dropping out percentage-wise and more are headed off to college, you have to ask the question, what's the value of a high school diploma in 2020, 2021?
Absolutely.
What's the value of a college first degree in 2020, 2021? I came out of high school in 1965. My first job, summer job, was a job with the state of Pennsylvania. I'm a very proud Philadelphian. And people who know me and know of my Bay Area life know that I always say Oakland is just West Philly with hills. Yeah, y'all ain't no different. just like West Philly, which is why I felt so comfortable there. But I took a job that, my mom got me this job, but she got me and my cousin and one of my friends, we all got jobs that summer for this Department of Public Assistance. My cousin and I went back to college in the fall, but my friend who was not in college stayed on that job. She stayed on that job for 35 years. She advanced in it, but she had a high school diploma that allowed her to have a good paying job with the kind of benefits that allow her to purchase a home, raise a family, support that family without being stressed. That's not going to happen today. One of the things that I say, will be in the pre-COVID era, you walk into a store like Macy's and somebody be trying to spray perfume on you. And I say, it used to be that the person spraying that perfume had a high school diploma. Now that person spraying that perfume got a college degree.
Right.
So one question becomes, what's the value of these credentials? The second question that I would raise, particularly around the prison industrial complex, is that when prisons became profitable, then you have to make prisoners.
Right.
If you keep building them, you got to fill them. Nobody wants a prison that is sitting open or empty, excuse me. And I would say better than 80% of the Black folks who are sitting in prison are on there for what they call paper violations. They've served their time for whatever crime they may have committed. But in the probation system, you're not allowed to associate with known felons. Well, if the only place you have to go is back home to your mama's house, and your brother has done time too, you're already in violation.
Yeah.
They're in prison because they can't find a job. Well, if no one will give you a job because you are honest when you fill out the application saying that, yeah, you've been convicted, then you're in violation. In Philadelphia, people were sitting in jail because they couldn't pay the bail. They didn't even get to court. So the actual creation of prisoners, and I've talked to probation departments before, and I say to them, if the people in my industry really did our jobs well, y'all be out of business. Because I actually give a commencement address. I know the warden at our local county jail, and he's trying to do some things a little differently. So he does actually have a commencement ceremony for people who get their GED, their HSED, or even their certificates, say in agriculture or horticulture. He just wrote that they are pressing on and bring their families. And so they come in, you don't see them sitting in a prison uniform. They actually have a robe over that, cap and gown.
Oh, wow.
But I always start that address with this question: raise your hand if at any time in your K-12 education you were suspended. And when I tell you that I've never had a group that didn't have every hand up. And I like to share that with teachers to help them understand they are complicit in the creation of these prisoners. They are complicit in fueling the prison industrial complex. It's one of the things that I learned early on as a public school teacher in Philadelphia, that sending kids home and excluding them from the education process doesn't help anybody. And my first principal once approached me and said, you've got a problem. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you've not suspended anyone. I said, that's the problem?
Right.
He said, well, what I mean is every other teacher has suspended someone and you've never suspended anybody. So I said to him, well, the truth is, no, really, I have suspended somebody. I've never referred anybody. I said, but I suspended them. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I said, if I refer them to the office, to you, what I'm saying is I can't control this and I'm passing it off to you, and you can do whatever you want with them, which may not be what I would want done with them.
Mm.
I said, and typically your response, if you are going to suspend them, is that you send them home. And so this is to tell you how long ago this is. They don't go home to watch. It wasn't video games. They would go home and watch cartoons.
Right.
And I would say, if anybody in this whole room need to have the right to go home and watch cartoons, it's me.
Right.
Okay. I like the Road Runner as much as anybody, right? I should be able to sit home and, have me a bag of chips and drink me a Pepsi Cola or whatever and watch the Road Runner. But that's not going to happen. So that my thinking, and I didn't know anything about restorative justice at the time, but I understood that sending them away wasn't going to help.
Right.
So what I would do is if a youngster was suspended, and we're talking middle school kids at this point in my career, I told them, I said, look, you're on suspension for the next 2 days. Here's what this means. I'm coming to pick you up for school. You're not getting a school bus. Mm-hmm. And I'm an early riser. I'm here I'm here at 7:30. So you better be ready at 7 so you can ride to school with me. And I'm calling your mom and tell her, have you ready? And I'm and you don't get to have lunch with your friends. You're having lunch with me. And you're not going home at 3:30. I'm gonna bring you home. And I don't leave here before 5 o'clock. Now, 2 days of that is terrible. But at the same moment, I'm actually using this time to get to know you. Mm-hmm. And you're understanding what my and what I'm essentially saying to you is that there's no way that you can be pushed away from me. I'm gonna draw you in. And I've had kids who try to skip out and go on to lunch without me. I show right up in that cafeteria. They with their boys. I'm like, you and I have a lunch date, remember? Mm-hmm. Let's go. It's now what they tell their friends, their classmates is, man, just do what she say do. You don't want to be suspended because you're gonna have your whole life is gonna be dominated by this woman. But that has to do with me having a sense of making sure they're restored to community, not pushed out of community. If you push people out of community, they learn to exist on those fringes. And that's what we're doing with our prisons.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think first what you said tickled me because I was in my mom's class in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. So there was absolutely no escape from that authority, I'm gonna tell your mama. It's like, oh, it was no escape. Surveillance was real. But it also, it makes me think about the after school space. I know that a lot of, well, first of all, this is a space that's evolving too, based on the pandemic and everything that's happening right now. Kind of the blurred line between school and after school is even more blurred now than perhaps it ever was before. A lot of after school folks have been recruited to work in the day program, recruited to work in the school, or to create pods for kids to be in smaller groupings. Like there's been a lot of incorporation of what have traditionally been considered after school or beyond school programs and staff into kind of the mainstream of making school happen. So there's that, and we can kind of talk a little bit about that, as well as kind of the role of policing in the after school space. Because when I was executive director of Making Waves in San Rafael, there was a lot of talk about what happens between 3 and 6 o'clock, and this whole language around that's when young people get engaged in crime, so they need to be occupied from 3 to 6, and then the after school people are kind of charged with holding kids in those spaces and then providing content, but first holding spaces. And the time, which is 3 hours, is a contested time. You have the school saying, we want them to do their homework, we want them to get tutored, we need them to be on school. So it's more school, not after school. That's a more school program. And then you have like coaches or people who are running athletic programs, et cetera, who need practice. I need 2 hours of practice. I don't need them doing none of that school stuff. I need them fielding ground balls. So you have these kind of contending pressures in the space, without them actually being fully conscious that that time is actually owned by an idea that that time needs to be occupied. That idea is being forwarded by police and by, you know, the structures of discipline. It's not necessarily what's good for children, no, doing it for what's good for children. It's like to keep parents at work and to keep the kids occupied till the parents get off work. So, you know, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
Well, I actually think the notion of dividing the day into school and after school is a fiction.
Hmm.
That the kids who are uh, deeply engaged in co-curricular activity, whether it is arts, whether it's athletics, um, end up having that identity, right? So you're sitting in my third period U.S. history class, but I actually know you as a quarterback, right? Or I know you as the point guard, right? Because that identity is big.
Mhm.
And a lot of times you've probably heard this discourse about the reason that kids are not being successful is because they are from a quote single parent household. That is, to me, is another fiction.
Right.
It is close to impossible for two people to raise children in the toxicity of this society. And so the kids who actually come out with some of the best outcomes have a lot of caring adults that surround them. So whether it is the coach, whether it is the music teacher, they go for piano lessons or drum lessons, or whether it's someone like Mike Cirilli in New York with Urban Word, and they all pile into that little room and
Mhm.
start writing, whether it is Boys and Girls Club, there's adults around them uh, that's limiting the amount of mistakes
Right.
that they can make. And let's face it, we're all fallible. We all make mistakes. But what we know about actual human development is that that frontal lobe, that place where judgment resides, doesn't get fully formed until you're about 25.
Mm.
So that means even on the college campus, these people ain't got good sense. I tell people all the time, you want to see undeveloped frontal lobe, come to Madison, Wisconsin in the middle of the winter on a Friday or Saturday night. And people are standing outside in the below zero weather, waiting to get into a bar for some beer. Now, is that the stupidest thing you ever heard? But when your frontal lobe is fully developed, you just go to the store, you buy some beer and go back home, right? So, but they don't do that. So why are we expecting somewhere between, early adolescence and 18 that they have it together?
Mm.
So it's not that they should never make mistakes. We just don't want them to make mistakes that are so consequential and that can be avoided. So for me as an educator, a mistake I'm not going to let you make is to make a curriculum decision around whether or not you should take algebra.
Mm.
That's not your choice. You 13, fool. You don't know. You 13. And I know that they are using algebra. I'm not saying it's the best thing in the world. What I'm saying is, but it gets used to exclude.
Right.
So whether or not you have a career that is math science related, that's irrelevant. You want to be in a place where they can't tell you no.
Mm.
So I'm not going to let you make that mistake. I'm not going to let you make that decision because the consequences are too great. Now, if you want to wear something different than what I like, that's fine with me. That's a decision that's not going, wreck your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to determine what your opportunities are like. So we have to be clear that yes, we want our kids to make decisions, but we don't want them to be in the position where the decision they could make has such a detrimental impact on them that it's hard to recover. Not that you can't, but it's harder. I don't want you to end up having to take algebra at a community college when
Right.
you could have taken it in middle or high school.
Right. Right. So in the context of culturally relevant teaching and culturally relevant pedagogy and kind of meeting young people where they are, I find that a lot of the success, especially athletic coaches, like I feel like athletic coaches are doing culturally responsive teaching just off top. It's like, I know you like to throw a ball. I know you like to catch. I know you like to run. I know you like to tackle. I know you like to slide. I'm going to meet you right there. I'm going to teach you how to do all those things that you like to do better, which is why they get kids who self-select onto the team, fight, compete to get in, and then they get the opportunity. They compete for a position. Nobody's competing to sit on the bench. Everybody's competing to be a star player. So it's just, and it's kind of the opposite attitude these same young people have towards their football team or their basketball team or their baseball team. Is kind of the opposite of the attitude that they have about their math class or their English class or their science class. So in that context, let's talk a little bit about culturally relevant pedagogy, both in the school space, but even more so the role that the after school and non-school space has been, because, and you talked about it, forming these identities, positioning people's choices, affirming people's idea of who they are and their kind of confidence. And just talk a little bit about that.
So, I am a mother of 4 children, and 5 amazing, as close to perfect as you can get, grandchildren. Just putting that out there. My kids always say, why you treat them so much better than you treated us? I said, listen, if I could have found a way to get them without having you wouldn't even be here, because they are just amazing. But I raised my 3 sons in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they all participated in athletics. And I can remember days when these young men got up 5:30, 6 in the morning, headed to the weight room. And when I would say, I can't get you up for nothing. Why is it that your coach can get you to come in? And they were very clear. They said, because if you come to the weight room, you're likely to play. So that often athletics has a guarantee, whereas school is a maybe. Maybe if you graduate from high school, you'll go to college. Maybe you'll get. But if you put in the work in athletics, most coaches will, you know what? I'm putting you in the game. You're showing me. So the guarantee, it's almost like the fascination that young people have with video games. The feedback is right there. Right then you're doing well. School is so ambiguous. It's so, it's often the luck of the draw. And let me give you an example what I mean by that. Do an activity with teachers in which I give them an essay that was written by a youngster who is allegedly a 9th grader. It's the first day of school. And the assignment was write a short essay about the last time you cried. And this kid, he writes this essay about the last time. It had to do with him stealing some money out of his mother's pocketbook and going to the store and buying candy for everybody. But his grammar is all over the place. I mean, there are places where he's just hedging his bet between T-O, T-O-O, and T-W-O. It's like, one of these is right, I'm going to stick it in there. Or there, T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-Y, apostrophe R-E, and T-H-E. He just, one of these got to be right somewhere. His voice, all that sort of structural stuff he's struggling with. I asked the teachers, and I may have 50 people in the workshop when I give them this essay, and I asked them to do what they do as teachers. Now they start with the little red pens and circling things and correcting things. And then at the end, I said, maybe you would not grade this typically because it's the first day, but I'm going to ask you to give it a grade. And I will tell you, if I have a room of 50 teachers all looking at the same essay, I get every grade from A to F.
Wow.
Okay. So what does that tell me? That often this is so arbitrary. See, if I scored a touchdown, I scored a touchdown.
That's right.
And if we're going to dispute it, go to the tape. You could see me go across the line.
Mhm.
If there was a 3-point basket and you're going to dispute it, let's look at the film, see where my feet are. Okay. So the fairness, and in many ways, I guess I would say the justice that is embedded in, say, an athletic competition is not in school. The school justice is arbitrary.
Mm.
So when I talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, I'm really talking about 3 things. One, that you are focused on my academic success. You know what it takes for me to be a 10th grader, what it's going to take for me to get out of this biology class and move on to the next science class. 2, cultural competence. And this is the idea that I think is the most misunderstood in culturally relevant. People think, well, cultural competence means you got to talk like the kids. You got to have pictures of Frederick Douglass up on the wall. No, 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 no. Cultural competence is recognizing that the kids come with culture, that they already know a lot of stuff. They are probably, many of them, of our children, will already know Black English vernacular. That's fine. I just don't want you to denigrate it. I need you to teach whatever you're calling standard because I need that tool. But I don't need you to put me down because I'm speaking like my big mama at home. Okay, you got to help me translate. So cultural competence is recognizing the kids' history, their culture, their traditions, their customs, while at the same moment exposing them to other histories, cultures, customs, and traditions. Rudine Sims Bishop says it best that we have to give our students mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. The mirrors are that I have to be able to see myself. Where am I in this curriculum? The window, I got to look out and see a bigger world. What else is out there? And the sliding glass door is you've got to give me the tools that I can move back and forth between the two. So that's the cultural competence. And that doesn't leave white kids off the hook. They need cultural competence too.
Yeah, you talk about that in this quote. You say, I want to suggest there is something that may even be more important than Black students having Black teachers, and that's white students having Black teachers. It's important for white students to encounter Black people who are knowledgeable and hold some level of authority over them.
Yeah, yeah. They have to understand us as fully human and not just the people who were their, quote, nannies or their cooks or sanitation workers. Then the third part of culturally relevant pedagogy talks about academic achievement, or student learning is really a better term, cultural competence. And then the third thing is what I call socio-political or critical consciousness. It's from a kid's point of view, it's the so what factor. Okay, now I know how to do a statistical calculation. So what? Or now I know about the War of 1812. So what? Well, if I'm teaching, because I was a history teacher, I'm going to link the War of 1812 with January 6, 2021, because those are the 2 instances where the US Capitol was attacked. So what are the things that are alike? What are different? What creates that vulnerability? What's the symbolism of attacking the cap? I mean, so that third part is about helping our kids solve problems that are consequential to them. And I think the hard part is that last part that's consequential to them. A lot of times teachers go in and they have an agenda. Okay, we're going to study, we're going to do environmental issues, and we're going to look at saving the rainforest. I cannot tell you how many saving the rainforest projects I have seen in my life. And when I ask the kids, like, well, where is the rainforest? They're like, we don't know.
Wow.
This is what she want to do. So I'm, really pushing teachers to understand, you got to find out what are the problems that kids are concerned about. I did a workshop the evening that Derek Chauvin was sentenced, when the verdict came down. And one of the teachers in the audience said, well, what do we tell the kids tomorrow? I said, how do you know this is what the kids care about? If I'm a kid sitting in Columbus, Ohio, I'm actually concerned about that young lady who got shot by the police on this very same day.
Yeah.
So it's not your agenda. So I think one of the best examples of a teacher who I think had really did a great job with this notion of the critical consciousness happened in a high school I was in, where a young man was complaining that Black kids were sanctioned more for wearing their hats, right? There's a hat rule in the school. And for whatever reason, lots of schools have hat rules. I don't understand what it is, but let's just agree that they have them, right? So the teacher said to him, how are you, is this just because of how you feel, or do you know for sure? And he said, well, I don't know. It just, they keep stopping me, you know. So she helped the kids design a project in which they did a survey of the entire school to find out, number one, had you ever been stopped for wearing a hat? And number two, what was the outcome? When they were finally able to crunch the numbers, they found out that the young man's assertion was right, that if you were Black and male, or Latinx and male, you are much more likely to be stopped for wearing a hat and sanctioned than if you were not. Now, they took this, they created a report, they had the charts, they had the graphs, they had little quotes and vignettes, and they took it to their administrator. And to his credit, he said, well, this is not good, and shared it with the staff and said, we got to be better. If we're going to say this is the rule, then this is the rule for everybody. So to me, that's helping kids, hone their literacy skills or put together their mathematical and analytic skills, but around an issue that they care about. Do I care about the hat rule? Not necessarily, but kids have all kinds of issues and concerns that we just kind of brush to the side.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word responsive, and I think it kind of tags or the idea of critical consciousness. It tags it. It's like not only are you like culturally with me. It's not like culturally appropriate teaching. That would be a different word. It's like the word responsive. It just speaks to everything that you said or about what is your level of communication with these young people, whose agenda is in the process of learning, whose agenda is being forwarded, being placed in the prime position, and whose agenda is being subordinated. And I think a lot of times it's the institution's agenda that's being primed, the student's agenda is being subordinated. And so this idea of being responsive to the student agenda is just really, it's politically powerful, even beyond just the moment when this child first realizes that they have agency. It's one of those kinds of lessons that you can carry with you in your engagement with all types of different institutions in the future. So yeah, very, very important. Very important. And we keep talking about criticality, so I guess we should name the elephant in the room, because when I first got introduced to critical race theory, I was already deeply engaged in the work of Paulo Freire and critical pedagogy. And so when it hit me, I was like, this is new. Is this something different than what we've been doing? Because I've been critically. So it's just interesting how new language emerges and then it kind of changes the frame. And how a conversation that starts in the legal field then kind of migrates into these other fields, and then it just starts to kind of shift the language. And you were doing that with the education debt, kind of borrowing from economics. But I feel like now, when I hear people mention critical race theory, it's almost exclusively in the context of education. Like I rarely hear about it talked about in the context of even where it came from. So, I think for folks who are not really familiar with kind of the dialogue as it happens in the academy, maybe just to break down, what is critical race theory? What is its role in education? And why are these people going so crazy trying to limit it, ban it, do everything they can to keep it away from their children and as much as they've been doing to keep our children away from their children. So what do you give us that lesson? Teach us what is critical race theory?
So first of all, it's probably more accurately described as critical race theories, IES. It's not just one thing.
That's right.
But I would argue that it is an analytic tool for trying to understand disparities. How disparities exist. So one of the things that I've been saying to folks, because I've done, as you can imagine, probably more interviews than I can shake a stick at since this thing has burst back on the scene. And I will tell you that I told someone, I said, if this is about a revolution, this is the slowest revolution I have been a part of, right? I'm a 60s kid. I know what revolution looked like. I've been working on this stuff since 1992.
Right.
Okay. So I've had a whole generation go through. We ain't revolved nothing, right? But it's a way of making sense of the disparities. Now, we've always sought to do that. We've always looked for something explanatory power, right? So from before 1619 up to maybe mid 20th century, maybe 1954 with Brown, our number one explanation for racial disparity was biogenetic.
Right.
These people just not smart enough.
Right.
Their brains are not big enough. They are, I mean, you can go back to Thomas Jefferson notes to Virginia. I mean, over and over, we have a biogenetic description of our inferiority. So much so that many of our colleges and universities have programs and departments in eugenics. My own personal connection to that notion is I was doing a little bit of genealogical digging. And I'm one of them families, like a lot of Black families, man, you don't want to dig too much in them families. We don't have trees, we have bushes, right? And you could go off on somewhere like, ooh, how did this person come here? You've been to a Black funeral, everybody looking at why she crying, right? But I was doing a little bit of that, and I found the 1920 census on which I found my grandparents in Fairfield County, South Carolina. And my grandmother was listed as, quote, mulatto. My grandfather listed as Negro, but my grandmother as mulatto. Well, if you actually saw my grandmother, there's nothing about the way she looks that would make you say that.
Right.
From her skin color to her features to her hair texture. But if you go across the line, on her line, what you see is that the enumerator has listed her as literate. So here's what I'm thinking. I mean, I'm making an inference here that the enumerator cannot accept that someone is all Black can be literate, because you got that biogenetic notion that must be some white person somewhere that's making this woman, fit, right? So, I mean, that's just how deep that biology, from Jensen and Shockley. I mean, we've all heard this stuff, bell curves, right? Round about 1954-55 with the Brown decision, and then subsequently the modern civil rights movement with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, you move towards an explanation that you might call that you begin to explain the inequality as lack of opportunity. Mm-hmm. But what happens is, if you trace each opportunity, you see that they quickly get snapped back. So yes, we did have Brown, but Brown is followed by Milliken, by Dowell, by Rodriguez, all of these cases that chip away at it, said, nope, you can't go to our schools. Nope, you can't use the county line is the line. No, we don't have to give you the same we don't have to spend the resources. Yeah. So and right now, voting rights, right? All of that stuff gets snatched back. So critical race theory says, no, the issue is systemic. It's baked in. It's not about the individual hateful person. It's about the way the system is lined up against this group of people. And again, I use a very personal example of my father as a GI serving his time in World War II, coming out eligible for the GI Bill, but unable to purchase a home in what was then called Levittown. My father then buys a home in West Philadelphia. And as I said, I loved growing up in West Philly. You know, people look like me, my teachers look like, I was happy. But say the white GI who came out at the same time, who wanted to buy a home, could take that same money, and at that time was $8,000, and buy a brand new home in Levittown. Why couldn't my father go to Levittown? Because Levittown had something called Clause 25 that says no person other than a member of the Caucasian race may purchase, rent, or occupy homes in Levittown. So now you're talking tens of thousands of homes that Jacob Levitt built. He didn't have that kind of money. He was no Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. The government subsidizes these homes, so the government is subsidizing this inequality. Mm-hmm. Now, some people might say, well, you know, you had a good enough life and, you know, your parents did get a home, you know, what's the beef? Well, today, if you go look at the value of the house that my parents bought back in the 1950s, that house is valued at $93,000. If you go look at the Levitt home, same time, built at the time that we move in West Philly, that home is valued at $565,000. So think about wealth transfer, right? So the system is set up that I've got to work hard enough to get my own kids to college. Whereas those folks who lived in Levittown, they could keep trading up to more expensive homes. Their equity is greater. They can position their children. I have a former student who teaches in North Carolina, and he asked his students this past year, to go home and find out if anybody in their family benefited from the GI Bill. Well, it turned out many of the white kids came back saying, oh yeah, my grandfather bought his first home, or my great-grandfather went to college on the GI Bill. One youngster said, my grandfather bought his first home, took the equity out of that home, started a business in mops and brooms, and became a millionaire. No Black students were able to identify an ancestor, a grandparent who benefited from the GI Bill. So someone might say, well, the GI Bill was for everybody. True, but at the federal level, but the bill is administered through the state. And we already know what is happening with the money that is flowing through the states as a part of the American CARES Act. It depends on what state you're in. Yeah. There are some people still waiting for allocations to pay their rent, even though the money's been allocated. The state becomes, you know, the notion of states' rights is still alive and well. So critical race theory often examines these kinds of things. Another example with is Social Security. We think of Social Security as ubiquitous. Oh yeah, everybody can get Social Security. But in order for FDR to pass that bill, the Southern Congress folks, mostly Democrats at this time, said, well, you have to exclude certain job categories. Well, one of the first job categories that he had to exclude was farm laborers, not farmers. You know, if you own the farm, you could get Social Security. But if you just work the farm, well, in my case, we're talking both my maternal and paternal grandparents who were sharecroppers, ineligible for Social Security. Who else is ineligible? Quote, domestics, maids, butlers, chauffeurs, cooks, nannies. Who was filling those categories at that time in the 1930s? Black people. So that's what critical race theory is always looking at. And I tell those people who will argue against critical race theory, give me a better explanation. If you give me one, I am willing to lay it down and follow that explanation.
But we haven't had a better one. Let's talk about that in the context of children, because I think you're right. I think, and as we mature and get older, we start to see things. We start to analyze things, even if we haven't read all the books. We just start to get more critical based on our own experiences, the replication of things that happen to us as adults, striking up memories of trauma that we have as children. So maybe my question is, what form should critical race theory take in the education system, especially with, is there is there such a thing as too young, first of all, which and in terms of being introduced to these kinds of frameworks, this kind of perspective, and then two, what is the role of, since this information is not something that is necessarily a part of your credentialing course or something that puts you on the track to become a teacher, then what is the personal responsibility of educators to become more aware of these theories and how they can increase in their practice, like increase their performance as educators and as teachers? So a little bit about how young is too young, and what does it look like when we're introducing young people to critical race theory, and then the role of the teacher in sort of getting this knowledge and being able to have this lens to look through.
So I'm not sure you have to introduce theory to to kids beyond graduate school, because it's graduate students and law students that need theory for their work. What you can introduce to students is the way inequality is playing out. So, in schools, it happens on so many different levels. It happens, for example, in the curriculum. Tracking is a perfect example. Again, I'll use a personal example to illustrate this. I went to what was then a very good high school in Philadelphia. Uh, it was about 50% Black and 50% white, more specifically Jewish. High academic standards and incredible athletic prowess. So I was known, our school was known as the basketball school. Wilt Chamberlain, Walt Hazard, Wally Jones, Wayne Hightower, don't come for us unless we send for you. Okay, that's who we were. You'll know the name of the school maybe if you follow someone like Will Smith, because he named his production company after the school, Overbrook. The colors on that is it's a vinyl disc with an orange label. Our school colors Black and orange, right? So, but I was in that school, but in the honors track. So I loved school because I had a lot of my friends there, but mostly my friends were not in class with me. Mm-hmm. One semester, because of a clerical error, I ended up in a quote basic English class. Now, I love being in that class because all my neighbors and friends was in there. It's like, yeah, I finally got a class with y'all, right? And I'm in there killing it, right? I don't have to study. I'm getting A on every single test. This thing is this. I love this, right? First quarter, grades come out, and I get a C. Yeah. Hey, hold up. I've been getting an A on everything. So I went to see my counselor, and she said, well, oh my God, I don't even know how you even got assigned to that class. You're in the wrong class. We're going to reassign you. Next semester, you're going to your right class. I said, yeah, but let's talk about why this woman gave me a C. And I have an A on everything. And she said, oh, sweetheart, the C is the highest grade you can get in that class. Okay, so think about that. That's structural. The best you can do is average. So it's, that's an example of how the system is working against folks. Assignment to special education. Again, it's often arbitrary. I'm not denying that there are kids with special needs, but I'm saying in those categories where teachers have incredible discretion,
Mm.
usually behavioral disorder, emotional disorder, whatever that's called. The teacher gets to make that choice. Gifted and talented, who gets to get in there? Again, those are often teacher choice, and the system will support teachers' decisions, whether they are right or wrong. We know the literature suggests that teachers are good at identifying a gifted child 2 out of 10 times. Parents are good at identifying a gifted child 7 out of 10 times. Because a parent will tell you, he different from the rest of these kids. Okay. He done took the clock apart and made us 2 clocks and they both work. All right. We see it.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things in terms of school funding. Now, whether or not we have to teach any of that to kids, I don't know. But here's what I would teach the kids. We talk about what's your sense of what constitutes fairness. Okay. And I could start that with a kindergarten kid. I have a wonderful teacher here in town. I think she may be retired now, but she used to do this exercise with first and second graders. And she would give out the snack, and she give everybody 1 Oreo, but then she give a couple people 2. And the first thing that comes out of the rest of the kids' mouth, that's not fair. Ah, what do you mean that's not fair? Well, we all got 1, they got 2. Then she moves into that to talk about why some people are getting X and other people are getting X plus
Right.
1, right? So that's kind of how that discussion goes.
Yeah.
I've seen other teachers who have had this discussion of same and different. What things do we all hold in common?
Mm-hmm.
What things are different? So what's happening in the national debate is, number one, it's not about critical race theory. Let's be clear. It is about the 2022 midterm elections and the 2024 presidential election. Secondly, most of the people who are showing up at these school board meetings are not parents.
Right.
They are operatives. If they are parents, they're not parents in the schools that they are protesting. They're operatives. And number 3, any discussion of race and culture is getting put in the same bag. And not all of that is critical race theory. There's stuff that deals with race and racism that's not critical.
Right.
All right. Some of it is like, we just all need to get along. Let's all hold hands.
Yeah.
That's not critical. But what kills me about the discourse is that there's this whole thing about, well, we don't want kids to feel bad. Seriously? Where were you in 1950 and 60 when I was in school?
Exactly.
Because I had to read Huckleberry Finn with Mark Twain's, prodigious use of the N-word.
Absolutely.
And I'm, like I said, I went to a high school that I liked, but most of my classmates was white. And I'm sitting there having to read this N-word stuff. I had to read Gone with the Wind. I had to read Robinson Crusoe. Then none of them feel good to me. Mm-hmm. Who came in and said she shouldn't be made to feel good? What you're saying is that it's okay for Black and brown kids to experience the racism. It's not okay for white kids to know about it.
Woo! All right. On that, let's talk about the pandemic, especially the inordinate and inequitable way it has impacted Black communities, especially Black youth. You've been presenting and writing about post-pandemic pedagogy and practices for changing the education system. So what should we be doing post-pandemic? What's your vision for the future of educating Black children? And can you share a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing in retirement in response to what's going on?
So my first response is, which pandemic?
Hey.
Because I've been arguing for the last 18 months that our students, our young people, our society is in the midst of 4 pandemics. The first one, of course, that comes to mind is the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID or coronavirus, as it's commonly known. The second is anti-Black racism. And why is it pandemic as opposed to epidemic? Because it's all over the world.
That's right.
So when George Floyd was murdered, and we all got to see it because SARS-CoV-2 or COVID had us stuck in the house and we had to look at it. I started getting responses from people, not just in the US, but I would have, friends and colleagues from the UK say, hey, we got this same stuff right here. People from France, oh, you should see what's happening over here. People from Canada, people from Australia. So that's the second pandemic that they're coping with. The third pandemic is a coming economic collapse. This thing is not sustainable the way we're doing it. We had something like 800,000 women, excuse me, wrong number, 2.8 million women leave the US workforce. So much so that the economists call it a she-cession, not a recession. Women having to leave because they are caregivers for either end of the age spectrum, whether it is their children or their elders, being in the most vulnerable jobs, things like restaurant workers, not being able to work from home as a lot of middle class people could, and people who are just waiting for the eviction notice. I mean, this is real that our kids are living with. Food insecurity is all a part of this economic pandemic. And it's again a pandemic because what happens in the US has a ripple effect around the world. If we don't buy stuff, then it means people in China can't make stuff. I mean, we are in a globally connected economy. And then the fourth one, those of you who are in California are acutely aware of, and that is environmental catastrophe. I mentioned that my grandchildren, who are, we'll say again, are perfect, but they're all Californians and they're all athletes. And they've said to me, listen, Grandma, we cannot go out and work out because the quality of the air is horrible. 3 of my grandchildren live up in the Sacramento, Elk Grove area, 2 in Los Angeles. But if it's not the out of control wildfires, there are people in the Gulf Coast region that keep getting hit over and over and over again. There was Ida, and then Ida was just followed recently by Nicholas. Nicholas slowed up as a hurricane, but the amount of rain was ridiculous. So I already got all my stuff out on the sidewalk, and now it's all soggy all over again.
Right.
So those 4 things are impacting our youngsters simultaneously. But it's not all gloom and doom. There is a bit of a, all right, somebody just hollered, I was Coach Billings' mom. I sure am. More important than that, I'm Markayla and Martin's grandmother. Okay. But the thing that our kids, the golden or the silver lining of this whole thing, and it doesn't sound like one, but there is one, and I'm very encouraged by the work of Arundhati Roy, who is an Indian novelist, who says that pandemic is a portal. It's a dividing line between the old and the new.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a choice. We can go into this new, dragging all this old stuff with us, right? The greed, the avarice, our smoky skies, our data banks, all that stuff that we had on the other side of that pandemic, we can take with us, or we can go through, in her words, with light luggage into a new world that we are ready to fight for. So to me, that's the place of hope, and that our young people can help us build this new world. So I reject this notion of let's get back to normal, because normal for my children, and I'm using the collective my, right, is being suspended, being in low level courses, being incarcerated, food insecurity, housing insecurity. I don't want to go back to any of that. And so I think this is an opportunity that I hope we won't squander.
Mm.
That I am hopeful that we will begin to think of new ways of educating. I don't think we'll ever see a break like this in our lifetime, where we all had to come to full stop and
Mhm.
start again. And I will remind people that at the last pandemic, the what was called the Spanish flu of 1918, what came out of that? The Harlem Renaissance,
Mhm.
right? So there's opportunities staring us in the face. And I have been calling for, I wrote an article about this, a hard reset. And again, I'm big on metaphors and analogies because I think you give people an actual something tangible to think about, and they can make that conceptual leap. So each and every one of us have one of these mobile devices at our disposal. Nobody goes anywhere without the cell phone. Actually, I went to New York a couple weekends ago and left my cell phone at my brother's house, and people were like, "Oh my God, how did you exist?" And I'm like, I had 2 days of true liberation,
Ah!
true liberation, because
Woo!
we all got them,
Yeah.
and because we all got them, and they are machines, they break. They don't do everything you want them to do at some point. Now, there are a few things that you may do to try to fix them. You'll maybe pull the SIM card out, maybe there's dust on it, you got to blow it off, right? Or maybe you take the battery out, make sure that the battery contacts. You turn the whole thing off, reboot it. Maybe that will do it. You get to your laptop, see if you can find a tech support group and say, this is what's happening, and they might give you some information. But if none of that works, you have to take yourself down to that Apple store, Samsung store, T-Mobile, and somebody going, you got to talk to somebody, right? Somebody who's all of 17 in a t-shirt going to say to you, let me take a look at it. And they may try some of the stuff you tried. If none of that works, they're going to give you the words you don't want to hear if you're someone like me who forgets to back up their device. They're
Yeah.
going to say, I think it's time for a hard reset.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? If you haven't backed up that device, them pictures are going away. All the little food pictures you done took of that sweet
Yeah.
potato pie you baked, that's gone. All of your contacts, and each of us have had these instances of somebody send you a text. Can you send me your number? I lost my contacts, right? But you're going to get back a device that essentially looks like it looked when it came from the factory.
Mm.
It's a whole do-over. It's a whole restart. That's what I'm advocating for education. And I wrote an article in Educational Equity and Excellence called, or Excellence Educational Equity, I think it is, called "I'm Here for the Hard Reset."
Mm.
I'm here to start all over again. I'm good with restart. I'm here. Let's do this thing totally over. Let's not even think about what we used to do. Let's drop some language out. Let's stop talking remediation because it doesn't even make sense logically. If I'm already behind, how is slowing me down
Right.
going to catch me up? That doesn't,
Right.
that doesn't make any linguistic sense. Uh, I'm all for acceleration. What you're going to do to make sure that each and every one of our young people has some accelerated experience, whether it is in the arts, whether it is in the sciences, whether it's in the humanities, in the social sciences, everybody's good at something. So let them get accelerated in that thing they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
So I see this as a place of promise. My fear is that we will squander it. Originally, before the pandemic, I was scheduled to spend a quarter out on the West Coast at Stanford, and I had agreed to meet with these superintendents in the area. Because we couldn't do it physically, we agreed to do it anyway virtually. So I had this conversation with them. And this one superintendent, he was just having a fit about, how much money he was losing. Because first of all, we didn't know what the
Right.
government was going to do. So
Right.
I'm losing all this money. I'm taking a $3.6 million. I have a small district, but I'm going to take a $3.6 million hit. And I let him have that rant because I think he needed to have it. But after he had it, I just said to him, I said, well, you're absolutely right. You are going to be $3.6 million down. I'm saying it because you said it. You know better than I do. What's your money looking? But you're going to take it if what you want to do when you come back is exactly what you've been doing.
Yep.
I said, but if you want to do something different, if you want to reallocate, again, I'm big on the metaphors. It's like when you come to my mama's house unexpected for dinner, she not running out to the store and getting something different.
That's right.
She gonna get creative in that kitchen. Another cup of water is going in that soup. That chicken is going to be cut up in some ways that you may not recognize the parts, but you're going to get some chicken, right? Yeah. So that's what we have to do. And who is better at working with scarce resources than Black people?
Yeah, that's real.
I mean, really. I don't know where they got them Easter outfits from. We ain't had no money, but everybody showed up sharp on Easter Sunday. Because somebody got creative somewhere, right? And so I don't want us to get caught up in this place where, woe is us. I mean, trust me, some people are making money hand over fist in this pandemic.
Look, we on Zoom right now. Right. Their stock went up 500%.
Of course. And our kids themselves are some of the most creative people at making something out of nothing. Derek Bell is kind of my spirit guide, the sort of father of critical race theory. And Derek Bell says something that always inspires me. And he says, just because something is impossible doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
That's right.
Now, that's not just a platitude, because my great-grandparents were in chattel slavery. And that was impossible.
No.
Okay? You go to bed a slave, you wake up a slave. But that didn't mean somebody wasn't working against it. My grandparents, as I've mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, were both sharecroppers. It was impossible. You can't get ahead as a sharecropper. But they kept working against it. My own parents were a part of legal apartheid, state-sponsored segregation. But they end up with a daughter who has an endowed chair. Just because it's impossible don't mean it's not worth fighting for. It's not worth doing. So I'm excited about our young people because I've seen them just make something out of nothing.
Yeah, that's it reminds me of the Ali quote about impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion or a dare. So that's just interesting how we subordinate ourselves to the opinions of others with regard to the idea of what's possible or what's not possible, even though we're living impossibility, we're walking impossibility. So talk to me about the One City schools and the work that you did in Penn Park. And I want to preface that question with this particular event is happening in the context in Oakland of a larger festival called Life is Living. And the Life is Living Festival has been about really kind of repurposing, revaluing, giving life back to Little Bobby Hutton Park or DeFermery Park, which is the park that the Panthers did a lot of their work in Oakland, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And so we have the free breakfast. We've been doing this for about 15 years. Wow. And then the pandemic happened and everything kind of shifted into the virtual space. And though we're still trying to get back into the park, we want to do it in a way that's healthy and et cetera. But we're always excited to hear, and some of those folks are in the audience today, we're always excited to hear about innovative ways that people have used public space to address injustice, to address critical need. And this is just a great example of that. So I want to give you a chance to share about this.
So, once the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic hit and we had to really just close schools, I started getting calls from reporters all over the country about how different cities and districts were responding. And there's a continuum of them. There were places like Detroit that said, you know what, We're going to make sure that students have access to some technologies, but we're not counting anything. So your grades are where you were in March, you know, and then don't worry about the rest. We want you to keep attending. To the opposite, Florida is saying, no, school's still on, even though you can't come. We counting everything. You don't show up on that Zoom or Google Meet screen, you absent. Da, da, da. So it's been that continuum, and our kids have had to cope with that as well as their parents. So one of my real concerns was not about the academic aspect. We started out early with your, saying that I'm, resisted this notion of learning loss. Just cognitively, that doesn't make sense. The only people who you don't lose learning, you lose
Right.
learning from traumatic brain injury.
Like, how much did they learn? How much did they gain? You know what I mean?
You lose it through traumatic brain injury or dementia. Okay. And even with dementia, it's up there somewhere. You just can't pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, they haven't lost learning, but they have lost some opportunities. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things that I was more concerned with than the academic piece of it was what this was doing to their social and emotional needs. The picture that you have on the screen is our program that we call Smartly in the Park, where I came up with the idea of bringing the kids at the summer of 2020 together in the park, third and fourth graders. Chose those grades because I think younger than that, it's just harder to manage younger kids with the mandates and the protocols. But I got the county and the city to allow me to use a park shelter to put together a kind of quote academic program. And I say quotes around the academic because I didn't really care. I wasn't going to test them. We provided them with materials that were really linked to Black culture. So they learned about folks like Benjamin Banneker when they were doing mathematics, or scientists like Charles Drew, or poets like Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni. I mean, we and of course a lot of fun and games, but I was much more concerned about our kids not being able to connect with other children and other caring adults. And it came about because even though the school district had provided food, because we did see that food insecurity was real, getting to the food turned out to be an issue. The community that I do a lot of my work in here is divided by a major thoroughfare. And so our kids, the food was on one side at a school, but we had a lot of kids on the other side. And what they'd heard from parents was don't leave the house. Certainly don't go across Park Street, because it's too dangerous. So a group of the young adults at my church started getting the church vans and said, we'll go over there and get the food and we'll bring it. Well, once they started bringing the food to the households and the kids were able to get it, they were like, you can't imagine how many kids are just in the house by themselves. That I this really sad that they have to stay in the house and they're not having any interaction. So what we really wanted to do was to get them, in a social setting, a safe social setting. So I think we were approved. I wanted to do 40 kids, and the mayor said, "Are you out of your mind? You cannot put 40 people in that shelter. You got a max of 25." So I was able to get around 18 kids, and then about somewhere between 5 and 7 adults. We actually continued the program, put it in the school, in the church itself, because the church is big enough and had reliable Wi-Fi for something that we call School Without Walls when school resumed. And we just had really good success. We were able to get about 50 kids, 10 kids at grade levels 1 through 5. That we weren't supplanting what school was doing. We were trying to complement it. And I was very deliberate in who we hired to serve as tutors for the kids. So they all have Black tutors
Mm.
who were side by side with them. We again had all the COVID protocols in place. I think we had one incident of COVID
Mm.
among one tutor. Um, but we tested the kids regularly. They had masks, we had hand sanitizers. So that worked well. The other thing I've been involved in is a charter school called One City Early Learning. And One City started out as a preschool. We keep moving up grade levels. And so now we're all the way up to fourth graders. But we have the planning team in place for the high school. So we intend to get all the way to high school. And we got a program that we're developing for the high school that will have kids leaving the high school ready to enter the sophomore year of college. So we are building an early college in the curriculum. And again, it's in the same community, one of the poorest communities in the city. I will also say, we didn't talk about this earlier as a part of our prep, but I am the chair of the Urban League, the board of directors for the Urban League of Greater Madison. We've purchased 18 houses. Wow. And are rehabbing them. We have 7 sold, and then we got people, and they're for those people who they could make a mortgage, they just can't get approved for one, right? Because they got bumps and bruises in their credit history. So we are putting people back in these. It's our little attempt to stave off the gentrification that is taking place in Madison. But some years ago, I was asked to speak to a group of folks, politicians, legislators, educators, business people, philanthropists in the city of Dayton, Ohio. And of course, when you talk to that kind of varied group of people who don't travel in your same lane, they'll ask you a question that may seem out of left field. So the question was something like, what one thing, as if one thing is the issue.
Right.
But they said, well, what one thing would you want to do, that you think could help change this education? And I think the person who asked the question was really surprised because he was someone from the business community. And I said, well, the truth of the matter is that there isn't just one thing, but I'm going to answer your question. You asked me one thing. Here's the one thing. Make sure their parents have jobs that pay a living wage.
Woo!
I said, that'll change everything.
That'll change everything.
That's the game changer.
Yep.
And he was like, well, we never even had that conversation. I said, that's the issue. You've not had, because if you have a decent job, then you're not so stressed that you are taking 2 and 3 jobs.
Absolutely.
Trying to stitch together. You're not worried about your healthcare benefits.
Right.
And you probably have not only more discretionary income, but you have more discretionary time. Wisconsin is a state that was one of the first ones that jumped on the Clinton bandwagon around welfare reform. I'm talking Bill Clinton. We had something called W-2 that required everybody who was receiving welfare benefits to either get a job or be enrolled in school. Right. And when we started doing large-scale studies of the impact of W-2, here's what we found. It's not that when people get a job that their kids' academic experience improves. It's when they get a better job. So, for example, those first jobs often were at Indian gaming casinos, all weird kinds of hours. The casinos open all night, so people having to work through the night, not being able to take care of kids, or all the money going to childcare, because those jobs didn't help improve academics. But when those parents were able to move into better paying jobs, regular 9 to 5 hours, not worrying about healthcare benefits and what have you, we began to see a move in the kids' academic performance. So yeah, if you wanted to do one thing to improve it, make sure people have jobs that are that pay a living wage.
That's real. That's real.
And in the Bay Area, you're talking 6 figures.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm laughing. It's like in the Bay Area, we probably got to be making $150,000 a year to have a living wage. But
yeah, my youngest son and his wife are Silicon Valley folks, and they actually don't live in the Bay Area anymore. They live in Texas.
Wow.
So it's their San Francisco Bay Area salary that allowed them to live really well in Texas.
That's
They
what I keep
they
hearing.
they still have those jobs. Yeah.
I need to hold on to whatever work we're doing here and live in Alaska or something. So you have one question in the question and answer, and I'm gonna then have to do this, what Amy Goodman does on Democracy Now! And wrap it up really fast. But how do you find the balance between advocating and fighting for Black and Brown students while still holding them accountable for their actions, especially when they're having a challenging time making decisions that benefit them positively?
Well, the advocacy work is often me in an equal status relationship with other adults.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to talk to the counselor. I got to go talk to the principal. I've got to talk to a teacher. Holding kids accountable is always me reminding myself they're kids.
That's right.
They might be in big bodies, but they're kids. I actually did a talk yesterday with our combined BSUs. We have 4 comprehensive high schools in Madison. And, I know that the BSU directors wanted me to kind of tell them a story of, all of my successes. And I was like, that's not how you talk to kids, because that just seems so remote. When I talked to the kids, I said, I'm going to tell you 3 words. I want you to remember them. If you see me in the grocery store, if you see me at church, if you see me at any event, I want you to be able to say those 3 words. And those words are purpose, passion, and planning. Or plan. Purpose, passion, and plan. I said, let me give you an example that you can relate to. Jay-Z and Beyonce. Their purpose is not entertainment. That's their passion. The purpose for them is generating wealth. Their kids will never have to work. But more importantly, they just gave $2 million to 5 HBCUs. Mm. It's generating wealth. Mm-hmm. The passion is the entertainment. Now, the plan, Jay-Z's didn't start out very good. I mean, what he was doing in the Marcy Project, that couldn't have been a real plan, Right. But Beyonce had a good plan. I'm going to sing with this group, see how I do. Oh, I'm actually pretty good in this group. I'm going to break out on my own. So here you got people who have moved from being singers and rappers to being entrepreneurs, to being actors, to being art patrons. I mean, so think about what your purpose is, what your passion is, and then what's the plan?
That's right. Purpose, passion, plan. And I would add to that for this particular question, balancing advocating and fighting for Black youth with holding them accountable. I don't have that on my balance. Mm-hmm. I advocate for and fight for Black and Brown youth, whether or not they hold themselves accountable, whether or not the children are holding themselves accountable or not. And I teach them about not only holding themselves accountable, but holding these systems accountable.
Right. You're going to change that baby's diaper no matter how many times they soil it. Okay?
No matter. Even
you're not going to say, this is my last time.
Right.
I've done this 4 times today. I'm not doing it. I ain't going to let
you. No. You don't know.
You got to do it every time that needs to be done.
Whoo! So we're so full. We're so blessed. Here's my Amy Goodman because we're 1 minute over. So these are a bunch of books that you can read that will help not only elucidate what's been talked about here, but also share the insights of guests that we've had in the past and guests that we will have in the future. Critical Race Theory and Education, A Scholar's Journey by Dr. Billings premieres next month. So you can pre-order that.
You can order it now. And if you follow me on social media, I actually got my copies yesterday.
Hey. So follow Dr. Billings on social media. Share some hip hop with her. She's a hip hop fan. On October 7th, we're going to have Dr. Venus Evans Winters. We're going to talk primarily about Black girls. And this whole conversation is going to be centered around the challenges and triumphs of Black girls. The Life is Living Festival is happening in Oakland. These are a bunch of the organizations that are involved. We encourage you to visit lifeisliving.org to find out more information. Educating the Black Child is presented by Edutainment for Equity in partnership and collaboration with the San Francisco Department of Children, Youth, and their Families. They're our partner, and we're really thankful for their involvement in this conversation. If you want to know more information, please visit edutainmentforequity.com. Upset the setup, get with us, transformative experiences for an equitable world. Thank you for joining us. And we are, believe it or not, we are done.